ever since the Vaporfly 4% released, running has never really been the same, and the way that we thought about shoes as runners completely changed. And what happened then was the introduction of carbon plated super shoes, which was the change in running shoes ever, really. And really a new era of running was ushered in then. But now, for the first time since 2016, 2017, where those shoes started to come about, we're seeing the creation of a new bracket, a new tier of running shoes right before our eyes almost. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. The idea of a super shoe that's even above the tier of your average carbon plated shoe. For me, the absolute inception of the super shoe isn't really with the Vaporfly, right? That was the birth of the super shoe. It's actually not too long later when its big brother came out, the Alpha Fly, which has sort of surpassed the original Vaporfly now in terms of legacy, I'd say, and is the Nike shoe that most Nike elite athletes opt for. I think that was the first time that we were introduced to the idea that a shoe with a carbon plate might not be the absolute upper ceiling of what a running shoe can be, and the innovation can go even deeper. So the Alpha Fly debuted in 2020, so 5 years ago now, and it debuted at £279 here in the UK. So it was a clear jump up. It was £50 more than what the Vaporfly cost. And the whole idea of the Alpha Fly was this was the absolute pinnacle. This was the beast that Nike could offer. It had more technology, it had the AirPods, it had everything. And this was a step above. And I think that's important to note. This was the elite tier of running. And those promises were sort of delivered on when Bridget Kosgei broke the women's world record that year for the marathon. I think it was a 2:18 that she ran that year, which was an unbelievable feat. And there's no better way to get people talking about a shoe than to have an athlete beat a world record in them. And I think this was when I was first really getting into my running. And I do remember conversations about the Alpha Fly being talked about in a way that maybe the Vaporfly was talked about when it first came about, but there wasn't really any other discussions like this, in the sense that there was a real discussion about, are these shoes fair? Are these shoes fair to the other competitors? And should we regulate these shoes? And then that provoked obviously a lot of conversations that World Athletics have had to deal with in the previous years in terms of setting stack height boundaries, setting carbon plate boundaries, etc, etc. And I do often wonder what running would be like if those boundaries weren't set by World Athletics for elite runners. Obviously, that's a really difficult conversation, and maybe one that I could have in another video. But I do think that it would be really interesting to see what, 2 carbon plates in a shoe could do, or if over 40 mils of stack actually would help an elite athlete. I think those are the kinds of questions that I'd be really interested to know, but not ones that we're going to find out anytime soon, I don't think. And those conversations about whether the shoe gave her an unfair edge were really the introduction of the same conversations that have always been echoed with super shoes, right? That they are all absolutely knocking on the door of the top level of the rules and regulations to do with running shoes. That's what the original Alpha Fly was, and that's what we've seen many super shoes after that do. But let's talk about actually what a super shoe is first, because I don't want to get too tangled up in this conversation without really laying down the groundworks about what this shoe is. So to me, what a super shoe is a shoe that's knocking on the door of that World Athletics stack height limit. It's got a radical geometry. It's got an interesting carbon plate formulation. The foam formulation in the shoe is something that's absolutely boundary pushing. It's using a new technique, foam compression, whatever that may be. And most importantly is that it's designed with elite athletes in mind. But interestingly, still available to the consumer, but at a very hefty price. And that is maybe the defining factor of what these super shoes are, is the price to the average consumer compared to your average running shoe. So we chatted about the Alpha Flies, and while yeah, I do think that they were the genesis of what a super shoe could be, I do think that the shoe that myself and maybe you watching think of when you think of this next tier of running shoe is the Adios Pro Evo 1. But it's interesting because that wasn't the first official type of shoe like this to hit the market. It was the Saucony Endorphin Elite. These two shoes both debuted in 2023 and I'd say were very, very different. The Saucony Endorphin Elite 1 was a step above the Endorphin Pro, which was, I think, always seen by many runners as slightly more average runner friendly super shoe, maybe compared to something that was a little bit more radical like the Alphafly 2, I think it would have been at the time, which was quite aggressive and could give people with heel arch issues a lot of problems. The Endorphin Elite was a firm, fast, extremely minimal shoe. I mean, the upper on this shoe was a really thin wrap, absolutely stunningly light material. And the foam in the shoe was Saucony's Power Run HG, which was an entirely new foam for the brand. And it was a brand new technology that we then saw trickle down into a lot of Saucony's other shoes. I think that's really worth keeping in mind too. I think the Saucony Endorphin Elite was really about a really hyper breathable, hyper light, hyper fast shoe. But the Adios Pro Evo 1 was almost like the evil twin of that shoe. Where the Saucony Endorphin Elite 1 was firm, the Adios Pro Evo... Bloody hell. The Adios Evo Pro 1... No. The Adios Pro Evo 1 was softer, higher stack, unbelievably squishy, responsive foam. I mean, I've never tried the shoe on. I've held it in my hands and I can tell you that that is some seriously squishy marathon shoe foam. And the upper is ridiculously lightweight, ridiculously thin. And also, it's an unbelievably good looking shoe. And I would actually also add that I do think that the Endorphin Elite and the Pro Evo 1 are two of the best looking running shoes ever, right? I think that might just be coincidental, who knows? But that gold Endorphin Elite is my personal favourite looking running shoe ever. And I'm so sad that I never got to own that shoe because, oh my God, that is a good looking shoe. And the Pro Evo 1 needs no explanation. I mean, that is an iconic shoe already with the simple 3 stripes. And I think the consumer desire to have a shoe that looks like that is evident in the introduction of the Evo SL, which has been probably one of the most successful daily trainers of the last few years. And then we've seen both of these shoes iterated on, and they both were upgraded in then completely different directions, which almost saw the paths of those two shoes converge on each other, and they kind of went opposite directions in the crossroads to what they'd started on. And so the Endorphin Elite became the Endorphin Elite 2, which you will probably have seen as absolutely the softest foamed running shoe on the market right now. I mean, it's ridiculous. I got to put my foot in that shoe this week at a running store and I couldn't believe it. It was so soft and so squishy. And I did think to myself, could I really run a marathon in this shoe? Is it too soft? And the Pro Evo 2 became sort of more aggressive, sharper shoe, slightly in the same way that the Endorphin Elite 1 was, where it's become a more aggressively rockered shoe, slightly more tapered in upper, even lighter. It's added in ideas about lightness and absolute incremental gains that elite athletes need. And these shoes really are for elite athletes, particularly the second iterations. And then the most recent addition to the super shoe category is the Asics Metaspeed Ray, which you may have seen debuted on a lot of running channels over the past few weeks. The super shoes are really not meant for run after run after run. You're not buying them as a shoe to be able to do any daily miles in. A lot of these shoes, and then particularly the Pro Evo, they're made for one race, one marathon. You know, there's arguments to be made that you'll get a few out of the Pro Evo 1, but I think a lot of elite athletes would opt for a completely fresh pair of any of these top tier running shoes in a way that maybe you might not have needed to previously with top level running shoes like even the Vaporfly, because the durability is always there. And I think, you know, you might have watched running YouTube videos where running YouTubers say, oh yeah, I think that this super shoe, like the Metaspeed Sky, for example, or that will probably get you, you know, 300 miles, 400 miles, maybe 200 miles of race level foam, and then, you know, the rest it can be resigned to a training day shoe for your fast workouts. You know, I've definitely heard that line before, and I would say that it's probably fair for these, and also for my Asics Metaspeeds guys as well. But this level of running shoe means that you only get one run. It's not a lot of bang for your buck. If £450 or $500 is a lot to you. I mean, if it's not, then I'm just happy for you that you can do that, because you're winning. You're winning. Can you get me a pair? I'll just anyway. And so the Metaspeed Ray has been introduced by Asics. And again, this is another iteration on that super light, super expensive, super efficient, hyper-rockered, really aggressive geometry shoe that is only available in a limited quantity. And these shoes are more and more becoming limited quantity releases. And so I think it's interesting to talk about what these shoes mean, right? What do they mean for me and you? What do they mean for running? Because I don't think this train's slowing down. I'm surprised that Nike don't have a $500 running shoe. And I think that there'll be other brands out there that will be thinking about making those sort of paper light Adios Pro Evo 1 type shoes. I think it's really interesting because I think what this ultimately allows is for the incredible elite athletes of the world to break records and to push themselves further, to literally do feats of human endurance that we've actually not seen done before. And that includes the attempts to break the 2-hour marathon on a traditional course. Obviously, the Alphafly ones did break 2 hours for Eliud Kipchoge. It's interesting, definitely, to think about the fact that as a prototype super shoe was already doing the kind of things that the super shoes of today are striving to be the shoe that does it, right? I think every running brand that is making a shoe like this will be having internal discussions about how can we make sure that our shoe is on the feet of the athlete who is going to break 2 hours in the men's, or break the women's world record, or break the half marathon world record. We need our top tier shoe to be on every podium, right? I follow a couple of running shoe pages where they show you the shoes on the feet of the podium finishers at marathons. And when I see that it's 3 Adidas shoes, I think about the marketing executives that are just like rubbing their hands together and licking their lips, because they know that a lot of people are seeing that too, and a lot of people are then going to go on adidas.com and have a rude awakening when they realise how expensive the Pro Evo 1 is, and the Pro 4 doesn't look as expensive anymore. And so, speaking of expensiveness, I think there's a big conversation to be had around the average consumer in these shoes, right? Because the benefit to elite athletes is clear, right? I think you see that, and I think I see that. These technologies, the supercritical foams, the plates, everything, they allow these amazing human beings to do amazing things. And that just makes me happy, because I love watching running and I love running as a sport. So great, let's do it. I want to see 2 hours broken in the men's. That said, me, I'm probably you, unless you are Sebastian Sarway, in which case, hiya, mate, you're awesome. Is that these shoes are available to us, maybe priced out to a lot of us, or so limited in their release that we can't really have access to them, but also at the same time they're marketed to us online by running YouTubers, just generally on these companies' websites. And I think it's an interesting conversation to talk about normalizing these prices. I think that it's getting to a point where that's a lot of money to pay for a pair of running shoes, and ultimately these shoes are for elite athletes. The difficult thing is that I don't think that average runners shouldn't be allowed to try these shoes, and that, if anything, I have more of an issue with the limited release than I do the price. Because I think right now really we're in a sweet spot, because the real function, the subtextual function, if you kind of will, of these shoes is that the technologies implemented in them become the technologies that we see in our running shoes. So look at all of the top running shoe foams right now, even the ones that are now making their way to daily trainers. So look at the foam in your daily trainer right now. At some point, that was the foam in that brand's top tier of running shoe, right? Zoom X is in the Vomero, for example. FF Blast Plus is in the Super Blast. And Light Strike Pro is in my Evo SLs. It's the whole base. And those shoes were £120. I think I got them even cheaper on discount. So I think that is really where the benefit of these shoes come in, because it allows the average runner to have access to these amazing pioneering technologies, maybe not quite as they come out, but definitely not long after. And I think that that's really important too. So I do think that the super shoes should always be accessible to runners. However, I don't think that we should see the price rising from what it has been. And I think the absolute sweet spot really is what you see in Nike and Saucony's brands, where the super shoe, the Saucony Endorphin Elite 1 or 2 now, is 300 and not 500. I think although 300 is a lot of money to spend on a pair of running shoes, it makes it more accessible to consumers who want to have that experience and might want to opt for that. It just makes it an option, whereas nearly doubling the price to the price of the Pro Evo 1 completely changes the complexion of that shoe's affordability. And I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. I don't think that it's a black and white conversation like these kinds of shoes shouldn't exist because they're alienating consumers, or these kinds of shoes should exist because of the benefits that they have to pro athletes. I think that we should be absolutely pushing the top level of shoes. No doubt, right? No doubt that these running shoe companies should always be striving for the absolute best in the technologies that their shoes can provide. And I think that the day that that stops is a sad day for running, because right now, like it or not, we're in a golden era for running. Popularity, technologies, running media, everything is just amazing time to be a runner, and to see the unbelievable upward progression of the running shoes available to people like me and you is fantastic. And then to see a tier above that on the feet of the amazing elite athletes of the world is even better. I think that we need to be cautious about how those shoes are priced and made accessible to consumers. But I think as long as those technologies are later accessible to consumers in much more reasonably priced shoes, I think we're hitting a really good sweet spot. But I think I want to chat about it because I think this is a topic that we can talk about for ages. So if you do have any thoughts on this type of running shoe, whether you're someone who feels a little bit like, do we really need all this crazy carbon plate nonsense, or you're someone who thinks, why do the World Athletics regulations exist? You know, I just want to just see ridiculous 12 plate shoes. Let's talk about it, because I think that this is a really interesting topic, and I know that hopefully there's a lot of people who maybe think the same. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed talking about this, and I think there's way more to be discussed on this note. So as this type of super shoe continues to grow, I think maybe there might be room to make other videos and have further discussions about the benefits and drawbacks of this kind of shoe, particularly for everyday consumers and not elite athletes who absolutely deserve the best technology in the world in their shoes. So yeah, 2 weeks till Stockholm, so yeah, gotta do some strength and conditioning. So why do you think this was such a long video? I had to put it off. So I'll see you in a bit.